Hey everybody, it's the history teacher. This time we'll be looking at the American Civil War, fought between 1861 and 1865. Please see the descriptions section for a link to a separate video which examines the causes of the Civil War. By July 1861, the United States was split in two. 11 southern states had proclaimed a new country, the Confederate States of America, with their capital first in Montgomery, Alabama, then later in Richmond, Virginia. The Confederacy's president was a wealthy, distinguished former Mississippi senator named Jefferson Davis. The Confederacy adopted a constitution, established houses of Congress, and sought recognition from foreign countries as an independent nation. According to Alexander Stephens, the vice president of the Confederate States, the government of the Confederacy's, quote, foundations are laid, its cornerstone rests, upon the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man, that slavery subordination to the superior race is his natural and normal condition, unquote. Southerners formed the Confederacy to preserve the, quote, Southern way of life, the paramount feature of which was the enslavement of black people. The Confederacy consisted of 11 states, and its population was about 9 million, 3.5 million of whom were enslaved. The states which didn't secede are referred to as the Union, and initially consisted of 22 states, with a population of about 22 million. Its president was Abraham Lincoln. Later, people in the mountains of Western Virginia would secede from the Confederacy and form their own state, West Virginia, bringing the total to 23 Union states. Although Missouri, Kentucky, and Maryland are counted as Union states, slavery was legal in these states and much of their populations were sympathetic to the South. Union advantages included a much larger population, far greater industrial capacity, more farmland to produce food, 21,000 miles of railroad track to transport troops and materiel, compared to 9,000 miles in the Confederacy. The Union also had a strong national finance system and plenty of cash. Finally, the Union's navy consisted of 42 ships at the start of the war, while the Confederacy had no navy at all. Confederate advantages included excellent military leadership, exemplified by Generals Lee, Stonewall Jackson, and Albert Sidney Johnston. Further, Southerners were highly motivated. From their perspective, a foreign power was invading their homeland. Confederates were not only fighting for their independence, but they were defending their homes and their families. Another Confederate advantage was that their definition of winning was, in theory, much easier to accomplish than that of the Union's. For the Union to win, it needed to engage in a costly, bloody war of conquest of an area larger than that of Western Europe. But for the Confederacy to win, it didn't need to conquer the North. It just needed to survive long enough to wear out the Union's will to fight. A final Confederate advantage was that the war was almost exclusively fought on Southern territory, which meant the Confederate armies had greater familiarity with the geography, more local support, better access to resources, and shorter supply lines. The Union intended to strangle the South into submission by blockading its ports and controlling its waterways. The Confederacy intended to win by fighting for its existence for longer than the North was willing to continue the war. Many on both sides expected the war to last only a few months. The ferocity of the First Battle of Bull Run in July 1861, a Confederate victory, signaled that the war would likely not end soon. 1862 saw early Union victories in Tennessee with the capturing of Forts Henry and Donelson by General Grant, and in the capture of New Orleans by Admiral Farragut. But the Confederacy inflicted savage pain on Union forces at Shiloh in Tennessee, and in Virginia at the Battle of Seven Pines, the 7 Days Battles, and the Second Battle of Bull Run. The Battle of Antietam in Maryland in September 1862, the bloodiest battle in American history, was technically a victory for Union General McClellan, but he squandered it by not pursuing the weakened forces of General Lee. The Battle of Fredericksburg in Virginia in December was a costly Union defeat. In September 1862, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, which announced that all slaves in the rebelling states were to be free after January 1st, 1863. Of course, those rebelling states, the Confederacy, ignored the proclamation, and so no slaves were freed by it. Lincoln did not emancipate enslaved people where he actually had the power to do so, namely in the border states of Maryland and in Delaware, for example. Nevertheless, the eradication of slavery where it existed was now clearly a goal of the war, a development which helped to secure valuable foreign support for the Union cause. 1863 was the pivotal year of the Civil War. General Lee defeated the Union Army at Chancellorsville in Virginia, but his most competent subordinate, Stonewall Jackson, was killed in the battle. Lee's bold attempt to bring the war to the northern states brought him to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, where he was forced to retreat by Union General Meade after 3 days of intense fighting. Confederate strength would steadily deteriorate after Gettysburg. In the Western Theater, the strategic city of Vicksburg in Mississippi was captured by General Grant at the same time Meade was forcing Lee out of Pennsylvania, and Confederate victory at Chickamauga was avenged by the Union at the Battle of Chattanooga, both in Tennessee. In 1864, Ulysses Grant became commander of all Union forces. In June, his army was badly mauled at Cold Harbor in Virginia. Soon after, Grant would lay siege to Petersburg, near Richmond, which would last for 9 months. In September, Atlanta was captured by the Union, which helped President Lincoln to win re-election. In November, Union General Sherman left Atlanta to begin his march to the sea, which would result in a path of destruction 300 miles long and 60 miles wide, meant to terrorize and demoralize the Southern population. In early 1865, there were only 2 major armies fighting for the South, General Lee's in Virginia and General Joseph Johnston's in North Carolina. The Union and Confederacy met for peace talks in February 1865, but the one condition that the South insisted on, independence, was the one condition that the North would not accept. In January 1865, the 13th Amendment, abolishing slavery, was submitted to the states for ratification. President Lincoln was inaugurated for his second term on March 4th. Less than a month later, General Grant broke through Lee's lines at Petersburg, and soon after, Union forces occupied the Confederate capital, Richmond. General Lee surrendered to General Grant at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia on April 9, 1865. 5 days later, President Lincoln was mortally wounded by a Confederate sympathizer while attending a play at Ford's Theater in Washington. Vice President Andrew Johnson assumed the presidency. At the end of May 1865, the last Confederate forces surrendered. Between 620,000 and 800,000 people were killed in the Civil War, far more than were killed in all other American wars combined. Union victory meant that the United States was, politically, one country again, but the divisions that ignited the Civil War and new tensions caused by the war would take decades more to disappear. Okay, this has been a review of the American Civil War. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.